We live in a world that our ancestors would barely recognize. Around the world, the impact of human ingenuity is now everywhere. We've pushed back the limits of our planet at speeds, depths, and heights that would have left our forebears breathless. Driving all these achievements is humankind's extraordinary gift for invention. Through genius and inspiration, we've created exceptional solutions to complex problems. From the everyday to the spectacular. Some of them good, and some of them not so good. This series celebrates the million ways our great inventions have transformed our world.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We use it to explore the universe and look deeper into space than ever before. It helps us to generate energy in a sustainable and renewable way.
The use probably changed the quality of our lives, our day-to-day living.
It lets us communicate with each other at the speed of light.
This is a material that has revolutionised the world. Everywhere in your home, it's even in your pocket, your technology uses it, it's used in construction.
Since we have used it, we have lived with light and with protection.
You could either have light, but all the wind and the rain and the weather is coming in, or you can close that hole and, at least you're sheltered, but it's completely dark inside.
It has revolutionized science with so few ingredients.
Sand, chalk, soda, and heat. From that, you create this miracle material.
It is the first material ever to be artificially produced by humans and remains a mystery to science to this day. Glass, one of the most phenomenal materials in human history. Masterpieces made of glass. They look as if they flow like water or reach into the infinity of the sky.
It's hard to imagine what it must have been like to live in a world before glass, because glass is just everywhere. If you think about windows, before glass existed, it would just be a hole in the wall.
Without it, we would probably still cover these holes with linen, parchment, or furs. The invention of this material enables us to look out of glass windows. Even though, at first, glass is neither flat nor transparent.
Glass was originally discovered purely by accident. It was a byproduct of a process that was going on at the time. But somebody was curious enough to look into it, to try and work out how you make this on purpose. And that was the beginning of glass making.
Long ago, Stone Age people were already using natural glass, such as obsidian, which is created during volcanic eruptions. Glass production begins in 2200 BC in Mesopotamia. It remains a mystery how the Sumerians found out that glass could also be made by people. From 1500 BC onwards, the Egyptians improved the production process of the first hollow vessels. The oldest hollow glass object found so far is this vase, a burial gift of the pharaoh Thutmose III. The history of its invention begins with curiosity. Today, however, we can use glass to satisfy far greater curiosity, exploring the universe and the origin of all life. Without glass, spectacular events would be pure magic without a scientific background. But all this changes with an invention.
At the beginning of the 17th century, Galileo Galilei looked up to the heavens to investigate the stars above us. But what he needed to see clearly was glass.
For a long time, being able to see long distances by using glass is impossible. This only changed with the invention of the spectacle lens in the 14th century. It was a spectacle maker, Hans Lippershey, who invented the first telescope in 1608. 2 years later, to try and prove a theory, Galileo Galilei improved the telescope and, in doing so, changed our view of the world.
Using this very early telescope, a refractive telescope in fact, he was able to show that it's far simpler to explain that the sun is at the centre and all the other planets are simply going around in things very close to circles. The heliocentric model of the solar system is essentially what he proved.
This is the beginning of the shared history of glass and astronomy. Today, however, there are completely different requirements for glass. Observing the stars is a huge challenge.
It's no longer just about the scientific method, it's about precision optics.
Since 2005, the European Space Agency has been planning the construction of the largest reflecting telescope in the world. The ELT is scheduled for completion in 2025 and will be located in the Atacama Desert in Chile.
Astronomers are incredibly inventive when it comes to naming their telescopes. One of the biggest telescopes currently in use in the world is called the VLT, or the Very Large Telescope. And there was a proposal to build an even larger telescope, which was going to be called OWL, standing for the Overwhelmingly Large Telescope. Now, unfortunately, this idea of a 100-metre diameter mirror was just too big to be built. And so they scaled back, and the telescope currently under construction that the astronomy community is very excited about is the ELT, just the Extremely Large Telescope.
Inside this telescope, there is a mirror made of a very special kind of glass, with a diameter of 39 metres. It's so large that if you laid it on a football field, it would touch the outer edges. A giant mirror with a perfect location. The Atacama Desert in Chile is a place where there is little atmospheric disturbance and no artificial light. To produce the best images, the mirror's glass mustn't move a millimetre and has to be absolutely heat resistant. That's why it will see 8 million times more light than Galileo's telescope. And that means not only creating much sharper images, but also looking further into the universe than ever before. Even though glass is structurally problematic.
Glass still puzzles us. You might think, yeah, it's a solid, right? Well, actually, there are people thinking that glass does flow on incredibly long timescales. We don't quite understand the atomic structure of glass, and it's something that we're still researching into today.
The story of the invention of this special kind of glass begins in the 1960s as the Cold War reaches its peak. It's precisely at this time that a series of experiments on glass ceramics begins in Germany.
In 1964, household crockery was to be made from a white glass ceramic. In the end, however, we had to knock the crystallized mass out of the tub with a pickaxe.
The accident is expensive. The research is stopped and banned. But because the material is so fascinating, with the same heat resistance as ceramics, Dr. Jürgen Petzold continues to research in his spare time.
My boss at the time, who was also interested in the product, was also interested in the material. He said that we can't actually do that, and then he had the great idea that we could do some research in the field of glass ceramics, with the ulterior motive of being able to present a result to our company boss, Eric Schott, on his 75th birthday, hoping that he'd be happy about it and not kick us out.
Dr. Jürgen Petzold is not fired, even though no one at the time had any idea how glass ceramics would change the world. As Serradura, the mirror for the telescope, it sharpens the view of the universe, and as Ceran, probably the best-known glass ceramic, it has revolutionized the kitchen.
Recipes for ceramic glass are closely guarded secrets. They're basically the same ingredients: sand, chalk, soda. But there are so many variables that make a different end product. The temperature, the method of cooling, the addition of tiny amounts of different chemicals that change the properties of the end result. The possibilities are almost infinite.
The secrets of how Serradura is made for the extremely large telescope are also closely guarded. But we do know this much. The glass is heated to over 1600 degrees Celsius. poured into a mold, cooled to room temperature, heated again to 800 degrees centigrade, and polished after cooling.
It's an incredibly elaborate process, but the end result will be to see the mysteries of deep space with even greater clarity than before. That's a price worth paying.
The giant mirror has a total of 798 parts, which are all individually processed. Only after completion are the parts transported from Europe to Chile and assembled. The special thing about glass ceramic, it doesn't expand at all. So, no matter whether it's hot or cold, the glass doesn't move a single millimeter. For this reason alone, it produces images 15 times sharper than the Hubble telescope. It can be used to study planets and stars, to make unexpected discoveries. Might we gain new insights into the origin of the universe with it?
Astronomers could be able to find Earth-like planets orbiting other stars. They could even find evidence for water, which could mean life outside our solar system. This is an incredible opportunity. Galileo's already massive mind would have been blown.
During Galileo Galilei's lifetime, glass was something special, unique, and extremely expensive. At that time, the center of glass production is here in Venice. The glassblower's knowledge is so precious that it is protected with harsh methods. As far back as the 10th century, glass is already being produced in Venice. It becomes the birthplace of many inventions and a center for the best glassblowers in the world. At the end of the 13th century, production is relocated.
The city of Venice moved glass production out to the island of Murano, not just because it reduced the risk of fire in the city, but also meant that they could keep tighter control over their glass makers and the secrets that they held.
In the Middle Ages, the Republic of Venice is rich and powerful. Its glass products are exported all over the world. To protect their secrets, the Venetians have come up with lots of ideas.
The master glassblowers had an important beneficiary role for the Serenissima Republic and became noble by title due to the importance of their profession. As a noble, he did not have to pay any tax. His knowledge and culture were an advantage for the Republic. Terms existed, and without doubt, they could not work with glass everywhere.
To prevent the secrets from being revealed, there is the threat of the death penalty. That was about 500 years ago, and long after glass has to overcome its first crisis.
We know that glass has been produced in Egypt since 1500 BC. We know too that the Romans developed a particular demand for glass produced in Egypt, in Alexandria in particular, and huge numbers of items made their way from Alexandria, yes, to Rome, but also outside the Roman Empire. A glass bowl made in Alexandria has been found in Afghanistan, for example.
In Syria, glassmaker's pipe was invented as early as the 1st century before Christ. But around the time of the birth of Christ, the center of glass production shifted to the Roman Empire. Finds from Pompeii and Herculaneum show that the Romans were already able to produce transparent window glass. But this glass was about as expensive and valuable as gold.
So there was a huge amount of knowledge that was accrued about how to make glass and even make windows and everything like that. But unfortunately, a lot of that knowledge, it was lost.
The fall of the Roman Empire set glass production back centuries. Until this knowledge is rediscovered, almost 1,000 years pass. In the 15th century, the next chapter in the history of window glass is written in Murano. Here, the glassblowers rediscover and perfect the lost knowledge. This black, metallic shining powder changes the color of glass. It is pyrolusite, or manganese dioxide, which is found all over the world. Finally, glass can be made almost colorless again.
It's amazing. Just by adding manganese dioxide, it completely changes the properties of glass, making it transparent. Wow.
A particularly clear glass is called cristallo, crystal glass. This is an incredible step forward for the time. Some sources say this invention is attributed to the Venetian Angelo Barovia in the 15th century. But the coveted colourless material is in use by the year 1300 at the latest. 400 years later, Murano glass is still unique. But with the Industrial Revolution, glass is completely reinvented. The 19th century, a time of progress and inventions. Factories are built and many people move to cities.
The Industrial Revolution utterly changed the world in the developed countries, and one of those was Germany.
This is where the young Otto Schott lives, and he will be responsible for an incredible invention. Schott researches glass scientifically, with precision and patience. No one has ever done it like this before. With an almost infinite number of test series, he wants to find out whether the optical properties of glass can be precisely defined in advance.
Otto Schott got in touch with Carl Zeiss and Ernst Abbe, who had a production plant making microscope lenses in Germany. Now, they were creating okay lenses, but through trial and error. They really didn't know what they were doing on a scientific level. Otto Schott wanted to help.
And eventually, he succeeds in precisely defining the optical properties. First, with phosphorus oxide, then with lithium, but the quality was insufficient. The first samples contained streaks and bubbles and are not suitable for microscopes. His idea? To stir the hot glass mass with Dutch tobacco pipes made of fire clay. And it works. This new optical glass is completely pure and, in 1884, it revolutionizes microscopy.
After all this success, Abbe, Schott and Zeiss founded the glass technical laboratory called Schott and Comrades. Later on, Schott's glass would be taken to the moon and used to film the first steps of humans on our nearest satellites.
But Schott's inventive spirit is far from exhausted. His next invention aims to solve a crucial problem with glass.
Glass is brittle. It's a material which does not cope very well with sudden mechanical shocks, but also sudden thermal shocks. If you take a Bunsen burner and you put it against a piece of conventional glass, even a wine glass, it will shatter in an instant.
This happens in 1891. Schott's second son, Erich, is being baptized when a gaslight is lit in the cold church. It breaks. And this is a key moment for his second invention.
As a scientist and as a human, I know what Schott must have felt. He desperately wanted to fix this problem. It must be solvable.
Schott starts another series of tests. This time, however, he not only solves a problem, but also enables scientists to work in a new, insightful way.
Glass has been absolutely central to the chemical enterprise, really since probably the 16th, 17th centuries. Before that, alchemists worked often in ceramic containers. And yet, the ability to use glass to be able to see what was going on inside was absolutely crucial.
Schott solves the problem of fragile glass. His invention? Borosilicate glass. It withstands temperature differences, acidity, and extreme heat.
Borosilicate glass has caused a revolution everywhere from chemistry to the kitchen. That's because it's got two key advantages over other kinds of glass. Firstly, it doesn't expand very much when you heat it up. That means you can take a borosilicate glass oven dish, for example, you can put some food in it, stick it in the oven, and even as it heats up, because it will expand by such a small amount, it won't expand so much it cracks. The other place this is really useful is in the chemistry lab, because you can put some chemicals into a test tube, for example. You can stick them over a Bunsen burner, and even though there's literally fire on one side and there's a cool chemical on the other, the expansion is sufficiently small that the test tube won't crack.
At last, scientists can observe chemical reactions without putting themselves in danger. A considerable advance on the clay vessels and fragile glass of the late Middle Ages. But glass history is also being rewritten in the Middle Ages, albeit in a completely different way. Between the 13th and 16th centuries, windows are objects of art, especially in churches. But then architecture begins to change.
During that Gothic period is that suddenly the availability of light, an architecture which allows light into the building, made such a difference to the emotional state, the feelings of the people.
Light, a central theme of this time. Along with the knowledge of structural engineering, the invention of the lead glass window is also decisive. Individual small glass panes are joined together by lead. The technique of producing flat glass for larger window panes does not yet exist.
It would be wrong to think that in the Middle Ages, people didn't have the knowledge to produce glass or didn't use glass in windows. Any visitor to a medieval cathedral can see these glorious stained glass windows. The issue was more one of cost. Glass was expensive to produce, it also broke easily, so it was expensive to replace. In buildings such as cathedrals, where cost was often less of an issue, installing glass was no problem.
Then the cost changes. Thanks to a new process to make flat glass, windows become cheaper. The place of this invention? Murano.
One of the first types of window glass was called crown glass. And the way that was made is that a glass blower would blow a spherical ball of glass and then place that onto something called a punty. And keeping it warm and spinning this punty around, centrifugal force would cause the sphere to unfurl into a flat sheet with the thinnest, best quality glass around the edge.
These glass discs have been produced since the 13th century. However, the craftsmanship and the manufacturing process varies depending on the country and craftspeople. The fact is that by working with the glassmaker's pipe, glass panes can be produced faster and with less effort. These bottle glass panes continue to be produced until the second half of the 20th century.
Another discovery makes glass even cheaper. It's potash. It can replace the very expensive imported soda in the production of glass. But although there's a lot of potash around right now, it's not going to last forever.
The end of the 18th century, it's the time of Napoleon Bonaparte, and an epoch in which glass production is facing a new challenge. Napoleon revolutionizes Europe by armed force, and this is one reason why glass is becoming more expensive.
Napoleon's demand for potash to be used in gunpowder was so great that little, if any, was left in civil society for the production of glass, leading to what historians have called the glass crisis in Europe.
1,000 kilograms of wood has to be burnt to make 1 kilogram of potash. Demand is increasing, resources are becoming scarce, and potash is costing more and more, a big problem for glassblowers and the buyers.
Potash became so expensive at the time that ash collectors go from house to house to try and get their hands on the stuff.
Only after 100 years, when Napoleon is already a figure of history, is the potash problem solved. At first, potash has replaced the salt mineral soda, which is expensive to mine and import. Attempts are now being made to produce soda artificially, way back in 1775. But it was not until 1863 that the new process achieves a breakthrough. The Solvay process, developed by the Belgian Ernest Solvay. For his soda, he only needs cheap table salt and lime, an incredible innovation not only for glass production. Soda is also urgently needed for soaps, detergents, in the paper industry, and of course, for baking and cleaning. Without this artificial soda, glass would never have become what it is today. And an invention from the 1970s that changed our lives massively would have probably never been possible. The 1960s and 70s. The world is growing closer.
Around this time was when huge developments were happening in terms of sort of live TV and communications, trying to send that all around the world. And that comes with real demands on how much data you can send and how quickly you can send it.
An almost impossible task. But that's what they thought about the moon landing.
The Eagle has landed.
Send ever more data, even faster. In Germany, Albert Einstein sets a milestone for the solution as early as 1917.
Einstein, the famous theoretical physicist, proposed in 1917 that a laser could be built to create a coherent beam of photons, an incredibly powerful light source that could travel for a huge distance. But it took another 50 years for physicist Theodore Maiman to actually make one.
The American Theodore Maiman is an engineer, physicist, and the son of an inventor.
He used incredibly bright lights to stimulate a crystal of ruby, and that produced laser light at 694 nanometers, a very deep shade of red, for the very first time.
The invention of the laser combined with the invention of optical fibers to create this new communication tool. Incredibly strong light could be used to code information and send it down these tiny fibers enormous distances. This information could travel across the world, or it could if it actually worked.
The problem? Data loss. USA, Europe, Japan, and Australia. Research is carried out on the combination of laser light and fiber optics, but no one succeeds in solving a decisive problem, receiving data exactly as it is sent.
There was a serious challenge when this was first being developed. A lot of light seemed to be being lost, and scientists all around the world are trying to work out how to optimize the production of the glass in order to reduce these losses.
1970, 3 American scientists succeed in inventing the first fiber optic cable that transmits without any data loss. They are Dr. Robert Maurer, Dr. Peter Schultz, and Dr. Donald Keck. 18 years later, the cable ship Longlines connects the USA with France and Great Britain with fiber optics for the first time.
Once again, the Bell Systems ocean cable layer CS Longlines moves up Chesapeake Bay toward Baltimore.
The first transatlantic fiber optic cable is laid.
On December the 14th, 1988, finally, the first transatlantic fiber optic cable is brought online. The T8 is still operational in 2002, creating communication across the Atlantic Ocean.
Today, fiber optic cables connect continents, countries, and cities. And data transfer is getting faster and faster. While TAT8 transmitted around 560 megabytes per second, today's cables can handle 100 terabytes per second. That's as much as 71 million HD videos being played simultaneously.
The explosion of fiber optic cables comes at exactly the right time, because this is the birth of the internet. Without fiber optic communication, the internet would never have developed out of its little tiny nursery stage. It would just be something academics use to communicate scientific results to each other. It wouldn't have become the enormous phenomenon now that influences every part of our lives.
The internet is a life-changing invention made possible by glass. Large glass windows that protect from the weather, but let in light is another. It all begins with mirrors. France, around 400 years ago. It is time for the next chapter of window glass invention, in which one man plays an especially important role.
The court of Louis XIV was all about extravagance and making everything look as shiny or sparkly as possible. And he's called the Sun King because of his love of gold and things associated with that.
Louis was a king who believed absolutely in his divine right to rule. Nowhere do we see this perhaps better manifested than at the Palace of Versailles.
And the highlight of his pompousness, a room full of mirrors. It could hardly have been more expensive, more noble, or more extravagant. But the knowledge of how to produce high-quality mirrors lies solely with the glassblowers in Murano. One of these skilled families is called Barbini. The family still produces mirrors today.
Our family's been present in Murano since the mid-16th century. They worked in every field within glassmaking, artistic glass, beads, chandeliers, and then specialized in mirror making.
The Sun King wants these Venetian mirrors at all costs, but not at the expensive price the Italian monopoly demands. So he instructs his Minister of Economics to find a solution. In a secret cloak and dagger operation, he sails to Murano and convinces mirror makers to come to France to work for the king. Industrial espionage of the 17th century. It is said that a total of 18 glassmakers make the journey to France. One of these poached mirror makers is Girolamo Barbini, an ancestor of Pietro Barbini.
In 1665, he and his two younger brothers, together with other glassmakers, left for France in secrecy to start out an activity of Venetian mirror making under the reign of the King of France.
In 1688, the French not only uncovered the secret of mirrors, but also invented an effective rolling process for producing flat glass.
The French technique made it possible to make larger mirrors compared to the ones obtained via the barrel-blown bladders made in Murano. In France, the so-called pouring technique, colatura, resulted in pouring a larger amount of glass, and therefore the final result was larger mirrors.
The Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles is therefore not only a testimony to this incredible time, but also a story of espionage and betrayal. Today, industrial espionage has reached a completely different level, and a new invention ensures that corporations, like the Sun King once did, are also able to draw on insider knowledge. The 21st century. For a long time now, making simple glass windows has not been a problem. It is the age of communication and information, and completely different issues come to the fore. Glass, the material of the present. We use it all the time, sometimes without even realizing it, until it breaks.
Cell phones have glass displays, which of course makes them vulnerable, but plenty of companies are trying to solve this problem.
One solution is armored glass, a glass that is also used in the military. It's almost indestructible. But there are other approaches to solving the problem.
Corning in the USA invented Gorilla Glass, which is so tough that it won't break even when hit by a hammer. And that's because of their special chemical recipe and their extremely secretive heating and cooling process. I will not be demonstrating it with my own cell phone.
Research on glass as a material of the future is also being carried out in the town of Grunenplan in Germany's Lower Saxony. But the solution here lies in the thickness. This is where the thinnest glass in the world is produced. It's flexible and break-resistant. It's only 25 microns thin. In comparison, a human hair is twice as thick.
I mean, it almost beggars belief that you can make glass sheets this thin, ultra thin, thinner than a human hair, and have it be flexible without breaking. I mean, with that, it's going to come huge numbers of potential developments in their usage in, particularly technology.
Of course, the recipe for the glass is secret, but we do know a few facts about the process. The recycling aspect is also an important factor. It saves costs and resources, and nothing goes to waste.
Our ultra-thin glass also has all the advantages that normal glass has over plastics. That's what makes it so interesting, because it is also flexible, foldable, and hardened, so it is not susceptible to scratches or impact.
The technology behind this is called the down-draw process. That is to say, a process that draws glass downwards, and it goes like this. The hot glass mass is drained through a funnel. The glass runs down through several rollers and gets thinner and thinner. Then the hot glass is cooled and rolled again. This is how this ultra-thin glass is made. It's so flexible that it can even be rolled up.
Our ultra-thin glass is used in many areas. For example, in the field of consumer electronics, smartwatches and smartphones. In the future, it will be used with foldable displays. At the moment, it is also used for camera sensors, camera systems, optical components, and as a cover for fingerprint sensors.
The idea of a glass sheet printed with microelectronics and folded up seems space age, but it's already here. You can get cell phones that fold up flexibly already. That is just mind-blowing.
Equally mind-blowing is an invention from the time of the Industrial Revolution, because it saves lives.
The Industrial Revolution was changing the world, but with those changes came problems. The invention of the car, fraught with difficulties, particularly when it came to windscreens.
The world around 1900. Roads are no longer used by slow horse-drawn carriages alone, but increasingly by much faster cars. However, the blast of the wind becomes unpleasant. Windscreens are invented.
Glass was actually one of the most dangerous materials at that time because it was being used to make windscreens. And in car accidents, the windscreens would shatter, making huge shards of glass, which is obviously very sharp and very dangerous.
A braking test at a scrapyard. Simple window glass, like the windscreens of the early days. The shards, large, sharp, and pointed. The risk of injury, enormous. This is a real problem for motorists around 1920. Without knowing it, the Frenchman Edouard Benedictus solved this problem, in fact, years earlier.
He was messing around in his lab one day and knocked a glass flask onto the floor. But instead of shattering into hundreds of pieces, it stayed pretty much intact. When he investigated afterwards, he discovered that the flask had contained a plastic, a liquid plastic called cellulose nitrate. And as the plastic had evaporated away, it had left a thin film of solid cellulose all around the inside of the flask, which is what was holding it together when it hit the floor.
Another test at a scrapyard. This second braking test does indeed show. There is a hole in the windscreen, but around it, the fragments stick together. They're also very small and have no sharp edges. This greatly reduces the risk of injury. Benedictus's triplex glass causes a worldwide sensation. It revolutionizes not only the automobile industry, but also the war industry and architecture. The principle of laminated glass is still similar today. Put simply, 2 or more panes are covered in an adhesive layer of plastic and then pressed together. But today, laminated glass has to withstand much, much more. Especially in architecture, skyscrapers are getting higher. The dangers more extreme. Glass buildings have to withstand nature's mighty forces. whether in Asia or in the United States. Typhoons, hurricanes, or cyclones, extremely high wind speeds can generate enormous forces.
I mean, I guess we take it for granted that just behind this glass that we are perfectly safe, but look at how much has to go into it to make it safe for us.
In Grundelfingen, Bavaria, there is a special test site for glass facades. Here, the fragile material is really put through its paces. Installed in a frame, the window glass is thoroughly tested according to where it is to be used.
In Hong Kong or China or in the Asian area, there are mainly typhoons. The wind loads are very, very high. In San Francisco, for example, where we also build a relatively large amount, the movement of the building shell due to earthquakes is very high. This has to be considered in the construction, in the way we position the glass. It has to be able to meet these requirements.
Everything has been calculated, but now it's time for the test. Will it be able to meet all of the requirements? Test 1, rain. Test 2, wind. Test 3, tensile force. Test 4, impact. Test 1 begins. Although the air temperature is icy and some of the water freezes, there is no problem for the glass. More than 3 liters per square meter per minute are sprayed at the window. The facade remains watertight. For the second test, a huge propeller is placed in front of the structure. With a wind speed of 110 kilometers an hour, the laminated glass has to withstand the force and not give way 1 single centimeter. In general, wind is always a problem with high-rise buildings, because at height, where the tops of the buildings are, the wind is always stronger than on the ground. The pushing and pulling produces swinging motions, which have to be balanced structurally. Back to the test. This step has also been successfully completed.
The facade tests are not only important, but actually very interesting. Because our structural engineers, or our engineers who try to conceive this facade theoretically, can also use the facade tests to check whether their calculations are correct.
For test 3, a pulley is fixed to the facade. Why is that important? The only problem that glass experts have not yet been able to solve is self-cleaning. Gondolas exert a strong pulling force on the facade, and this has to be tested. Window cleaners' lives depend on it. In order to generate real conditions, 107 kilograms are suspended from the facade using a cable winch. The test is successful, and it's becoming dark. The team quickly sets up the construction for the last test. This time, a 50-kilogram bag filled with tiny glass beads is going to bash against the pane with great force. It simulates, for example, a large bird or a human being bouncing against the window pane. So what happens to the glass with this kind of impact?
I mean, you could see the glass sort of flexing and bending and it wasn't cracking. That's amazing.
The glass meets all the requirements, unlike the sack. Glass is obviously an opponent not to be underestimated. Architects and engineers can look forward to the future, because glass, although brittle, can now do almost anything.
The panes are getting bigger and bigger. The quality of the glass is getting better and better. We're getting curved glass in a different or better quality, so of course architecture has more freedom and can build crazier things. We've got some stuff on the radar right now that looks really great, so we can look forward to that.
Architecture's limits are being pushed ever further. It seems like anything is possible. But it's been a long journey to get to this point. In Europe, the years following World War II look quite different. Cities have to be rebuilt. Food is rationed. A time of having to do without. It's not until the mid-50s that the biggest crisis is overcome and people begin to think about the future. Windows are now being produced in large quantities and at low cost, making them affordable for everyone. But with luxury comes a first world problem. The glass panes distort the view to the outside.
It looks like a liquid in which everything has been stopped, and nothing has had time to choose the perfect optimum arrangement, right? Which is what you get in a crystal. In a crystal, everything is arranged in neat rows and neat lines, and there is a structure. The thing about a glossy material is that it's kind of random. And that's the secret to its properties.
An engineer and war veteran from England, Sir Alistair Pilkington, is to solve the problem of the view-distorting panes and has a groundbreaking idea.
Pilkington discovered that you can float molten glass on a layer of liquid tin. Because the liquid tin is more dense than the molten glass, the glass floats on top, spreading out to create a perfectly flat, even, transparent surface. If you cool that glass, it can then be turned into windows, doors, anything you like.
Many liquids mix together, but some don't, because their density is different, such as vinegar and oil. The same is true for liquid tin and glass, and this is the principle of the float process. After the glass is heated to around 1,300 Celsius, it flows onto a tin bath. In the tin bath, the size and thickness of the glass can be variably defined. Over a length of around 240 meters, the glass is slowly cooled. When brought to room temperature, the glass is evenly flat. Finally, the glass pane is simply cut to size, making glass windows and doors for our houses and buildings.
So at last, we have glass that's homogeneous, nice and even, and you can actually see the real world on the other side, that it's not distorted. And this process means that we can make huge sheets of glass now, up to 20 meters wide.
To fill the holes in the walls with glass, lots of problems had to be solved. But today, not only can huge panes of glass be produced, they can also be made into safe window glass using a special process. The current world's largest window pane is 20 by 3 meters large, made in Germany. 4,000 years of glass history. It's an incredible material. It's transparent, almost non-existent, and yet it protects us. It's thinner than a human hair and can't break. It's art and science. It can unite continents and is a component of energy production. And one of the biggest benefits in recent history. It's sustainable and recyclable. But what might happen next? Some ideas may seem utopian, but they could solve problems that we don't even know exist. Glass in the form of an intelligent plaster could scan injuries and help us to heal faster. Or, and this is no longer a utopian vision, mix our real world with the virtual world. With augmented reality, AR for short, we can better understand interconnections. Until now, it was only possible to switch from reality to a virtual space. But mixing them like this opens up many new possibilities. But what role does glass play here? The spectacle not only consists of a highly complex computer, but also of special lenses that have to be manufactured with absolute precision and, above all, have to be 100% flat. A real challenge for engineers. With this glass technology, we can suddenly perceive reality in a completely different way. We receive information about everything that interests us. We can put things together or take them apart without destroying them. But this is by no means the end of glass's development. Thanks to glass, we're looking deeper into the universe than ever before.
It's actually amazing to think that glass played such a fundamental role in our understanding of our solar system.
Glass has revolutionized the way we live.
I think it's almost impossible to imagine what it was like before glass was invented.
Glass enables us to share thoughts at the speed of light.
Glass still is a mysterious substance, even with the long history of our usage of it, but it's been so versatile and we're pushing the boundaries of what's possible to do with it today.
What will the future of glass research hold in store for us?
Among every other profession in the world, glass is one of the most difficult arts to deal with. Why? It would require 4 lives in order to understand something about glass.
From a simple, dull material to the science fiction substance of the future.
All of this is because of glass. Where would we be without this miracle material?